Improving our digital brushwork does not need to be so complicated. We don't need any fancy art programs, and we don't need any fancy brushes. All we need to do is steal. I'm gonna steal your intro, Marco Bucci. Do you think this is a traditional or a digital painting? It's traditional, because I suck at traditional art. My sister's really good though. Check this frog out. It's a little frog guy. She made it for me. It's a little frog. So what do I mean by steal? Well, the fastest way to learn anything is to do studies. If you wanted to do anatomy, you would do anatomy studies. But since brushwork doesn't exist in real life, it doesn't exist in photos, so the only way we can study it is by studying other people's art. So one of my favorite artists is Yu-Ming Lee. I'll put a link to their Instagram in the description. So I chose this piece to study. What I love about Yu-Ming Lee is that from far away, it looks like a photograph. But when you zoom in, you notice how simplified it is. I especially love Lee's paintings of statues. And I did a study of one a while ago. So the way I approach brushwork studies is by looking at the different shapes you see in your reference and try to replicate them using the biggest brush size you can for that shape. I find that it turns out best when you don't have to go over the same area over and over again, which tends to happen when you zoom in and use a smaller brush size. Now for the specific brush I'm using the same brush I use for most of my painting, which is just a pretty basic square, chalky brush in Krita. I really love doing brushwork studies or just paintings where I think about the brushwork even if I'm not using a reference. When I'm focused on brushwork, art feels like it should. It feels like play. It's just fun and easy, and I'm usually just not that worried about the result, but then the result usually turns out pretty cool too. And they usually go by very fast, both because I get into a flow state, but also because I don't zoom in, so it just doesn't take very much time at all. So this study that I'm doing right now took 22 minutes. And here's the finished piece. Now obviously we don't want to sit around and just copy one person's brushwork, so make sure to steal from a lot of different artists. For this video I started this study of Leyendecker, but it didn't turn out so good, so I gave up on it. And then a few months ago I did this study of Sargent. So now I'm going to do a photo study to see if we can get some cool looking brushwork on our own. So this is the reference I'm using, but I'm making it a painting of my OC, so I won't copy it exactly. Usually when I'm focused on brushwork, I paint from scratch, but for this one I just felt like doing a sketch, so. I'm not necessarily trying to replicate traditional looking brushwork, because I don't actually have a traditional art background. The painting I showed in the beginning is literally my only ever traditional painting. I've started out with digital art, and like digital art is like all I've done. I've done some pen sketches, but one gouache painting is all the traditional painting I've ever done. Traditional looking brushwork is really cool, but we can still get really good brushwork even if it's pretty obvious that it's digital. My brushwork isn't the best, and so you going out, finding art that you really like and trying to emulate the brushwork will teach you so much more than if I was to just sit here and ramble about what good brushwork is for 10 minutes. That's not a dig to like Marco Bucci though. Marco Bucci is great. I remember when I first saw his video about like lost edges. That shit blew my mind. That was one of two videos that I saw where it was actually just like a mind blow moment. So right after watching that video, I tried to do this painting and tried to like think about like lost edges and stuff, because it was something I never thought about before. That was like 8 months ago. So something I find about brushwork is that it's a lot easier when you're painting something that isn't pretty. Like lately, I've just been painting a bunch of pretty girls, and for this study, it was so nice to come back to painting, you know, a rough looking man, hunk of man, because there's so much more going on in the face. I mean, like forehead wrinkles, for example. That's an opportunity to add some cool brushwork there. But when you're painting pretty girls, like keeping it pretty, you have to like just kind of hide structure and make everything soft and like that. So it's kind of boring. But that basically goes for everything with art. It's basically everything about art is easier if you forget about appeal. I mean, like structure, for example. If you want to get better at drawing faces, drawing portraits, it's so much easier if you forget about appeal, so you can focus on structure, because a part about appeal is like hiding structure. So if you're going to try to learn structure while also hiding it to make it appealing, it's just so much more complicated. So yeah, I definitely want to get back to painting more rough looking men and stuff like that. But it's a real shame that things that aren't like attractive don't get like views on social media and stuff. It's kind of lame. Adding this rim light was so satisfying. Though initially my instinct was to use basically pure white, but I settled on a less bright yellow because I wanted a kind of dull feel for this painting. Like it's not like a happy painting. And I approached shadows the same way. I stayed away from pure black and just used like dark blues and purples and stuff. Some people say you should never use pure black in art. I don't think that's necessarily true. Just kind of be aware of the value range you use and how it affects like the mood and feel. Using pure blacks can make it look a bit more digital though, because you wouldn't really get pure black in traditional art. Something that's really easy to make your brushwork look better is to grab different textures from Google. So for example, you can grab paper texture, just get one without a watermark, and then you can put them on top of your artwork and set it to like multiply or overlay or something like that. And it's essentially just noise, but it just makes it look less digital. And here's how the final piece turned out.